Welcome to the Equine Vet Connect podcast. I'm your host, Dan Carter. I'm a veterinarian and a farrier. The goal of this podcast is to educate horse people, break things down, bust myths, and keep it real. Speaking of breaking things down, here's my legal disclaimer to keep my attorney and insurance company happy. While I am a vet, I may not be your vet. Contact them before trying anything you hear on this podcast. Remember, just because you watched it on YouTube or heard it on a podcast does not mean you can do it. Please use common sense. Welcome back to the Equine Vet Connect podcast. I'm your host, Dan Carter. We're here in the studios at Countryside Veterinary Services, or Countryside Equine Hospital, as we now go by. We also know one as Treatment Room 1. I've got with me Riley this morning. She's one of our technicians here. Say hello to everybody, Riley.
Hi, everyone.
So today's topic, all right, so Riley's not just a tech here, but she's also a horse owner, right?
Right.
All right, you got Bacardi.
That's correct.
And what do you do with her?
Well, right now she's just kind of my pasture ornament. She was my jumper, but haven't been able to do that in a little bit. So, yeah, she's just a pasture ornament, getting fat and happy.
Cool. So one of the things that comes a lot when we're on the truck rides, we get a lot of questions about nutrition, all right, and feeding horses. So, yeah, as we talk about, our goal of this podcast is to keep things, to break things down in simple terms. So we're just going to go through a quick, down and dirty, simple way to look at nutrition. Nothing crazy, just something that you can start thinking through on how to feed a horse. We're going to keep it simple, and we're going to get this where you can understand it, all right?
Okay.
So when we're talking about nutrition, we got some basic nutrients, right? We got a few things that every horse needs. You might, remember what the number one most important nutrient is? This is the one everybody forgets. That's right, water. All right. Water is often overlooked, but that's one of the most important nutrients we can have. Y'all excuse our wonderful easel here. We had to put something together, but make sure your horse always has water. So, and when you've heard in the colic episode, not being hydrated is critical. So, making sure you've got good free choice access to water. But that's all we're going to say about it, because that's not going to change anything other than keeping our horses hydrated. So, the other nutrients we've got to worry about and we've got to make sure we're balancing out for are, we need some carbohydrates. All right, carbs. We're going to need some protein. We're going to break this down further. We've got protein. We're going to break that further down into amino acids. All right. We're going to need some fats. Not much, though. We're going to hear me go on my tirade. Some fats, vitamins, all right, minerals. Those are going to be our base nutrients, right?
Right.
Okay. Riley, what questions? You got any things that you've heard about, or things that you want clarified on any of these things?
I would say where to begin, just with a basic feeding regimen.
Right.
Like, I understand all those things have to be hit, but if we have a horse that's already, at a healthy weight, what do we need to just give them just to maintain that? So we're hitting all of those points.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think we need to, the next place I want to go then, because you said horse at a healthy weight. So obviously we're talking about horses could have different nutrient needs depending on what they're doing, right?
Correct.
Okay. So let's break that down. Let's put together a math equation. Let's think about it from a math perspective. All right, this is the way I think about it in my head. And this is actually, when I was doing nutrition work, this is actually how we were balancing a lot of these diets, okay? So what I'd like to talk about is the first thing we got to do is maintain. All right, we got to maintain,
right.
All right? So we're going to call this maintenance, all right? So these are these nutrients that we need: the carbohydrates, the proteins, the fats, the vitamins, and minerals. This is what we need just to live. Okay.
Okay.
Would it help if I put some random numbers?
Yeah, just some simple math.
Okay. These numbers mean absolutely nothing. I need everybody to realize that in the podcast. All right. So we're going to just say calories. All right. Let's go. Let's use this. Let's look at it from a calorie standpoint.
All right.
Okay. So let's say, and again, these numbers mean absolutely nothing. They're just so we can do math. I don't want to get into how many megacals a horse needs to eat. That's a whole nother episode. But let's say, again, they mean nothing. A horse needs 100 calories to live a day. All right, that's just stand there, breathe, walk around. It needs 100 calories.
Okay.
Right? So he needs 100 calories. All right. Now, that just maintains everything. We're not getting fatter. We're not getting skinnier. We're just living. Okay. Ricardo used to be a jumper, right?
Right.
So what'd you have to do to be a successful jumper?
Well,
You had to train.
right.
You go to horse shows.
Okay.
All right. So in this case, we're going to maintain. She said a normal horse just there. All right. So we're going to maintain. Then we're going to perform.
Okay, so
Okay.
we're talking in a performance perspective, not in a main, just not, okay.
We're going to go through the whole math of like the different scenarios we got. So
Okay.
the horse needs to perform. Okay. When, oh, that's an R. When a horse was performing, they're going to burn calories.
Correct.
All right, so we've got to add supplemental calories, right?
Mm-hmm.
So depending on the exercise, we're going to say he needs 20 more calories.
Okay.
All right, so we need 20 more.
Mm-hmm.
There's our 20 more calories. So that means we've maintained him. Now we're performing.
Right.
We're going to burn 20 calories. If we don't want to lose weight, we got to give those calories back.
Right.
All right, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, what if he's also underweight?
Then we need to get even more.
Right, so when we talk about an underweight body condition score, right?
Right.
So we're underweight, we need a better body condition score. So we need to give more calories. So I want him to gain weight, so we got to, let's say we got to gain, all right? So in order to get him gain, we got to add an extra 20 calories, all right? Because we're trying to increase our weight. Again, numbers mean nothing, they're just holding places here. So we need 100 calories to live, then we're going to perform, we need 20, and then we also need to gain some weight, we need another 20, all right? And you can flip those two, you can say we got to
Right.
gain and we also got to perform, all right? Going into winter, and this is why we're talking about this today. We're going into winter. What happens in the wintertime?
They drop weight.
Why?
Because they're using more calories to keep warm.
There we go. Horses get cold. And when the weather's colder, we're going to burn more calories. So there's actually a magic number out there. I don't know what it is in horses. I'm not sure anybody's really figured it out. I mean, cattle is about 46 degrees. We start getting less than 46 degrees, our nutrient demand actually goes up.
Okay.
Nobody's figured that number out in horses that I know of. And if somebody has, throw it in the comments. Maybe I just missed it in the research. But weather. All right, so when it gets cold, we need more calories. All right. Based on the temperature out there, we're going to say we need another 10. All right. So we go through and run the math. We need 150 calories. Again, numbers mean nothing. Nobody put in there in the comments like,
Right.
oh, those numbers are so wrong. They mean nothing. Okay. So that's what we're looking at. All right. So those are the different situations that your horse could be in that we need to add. We need to add nutrients.
Right.
All right. So we looked at it from a calorie standpoint. The cool thing is we can actually look at it from a protein standpoint as well.
Okay.
So the same thing. We need protein. We need X amount to maintain. If we're performing, we're going to go through more protein
Right.
because we've got muscle turnover.
Right.
And then also, if we're trying to build muscle, we need more. The only thing that it doesn't affect is going to be cold. Cold and protein don't really matter.
Okay.
That's a pure calorie standpoint. That's your carbohydrates.
Okay.
All right, carbohydrates. And I should have said that too. Calories, there's different nutrients, different number of calories based on carbohydrates and fat.
Okay.
Okay. We'll dive into that a little bit. So one of the things to watch is you said your horse is, doing great, right?
Healthy weight.
Healthy
right.
weight,
Not performing.
not performing.
Correct.
All right, so really we just need to maintain.
Right.
The rest of this, what if she was underweight? Then we need to feed to gain.
Right.
We're not doing anything, right? So if we're not doing anything, not exercising, then the performance part goes away. We're just feeding to gain.
Correct.
And as the temperature drops, we got to feed for cold.
Right.
And I think that's important because all too often people want to know, like, well, how much do I feed?
That's accurate.
The number changes.
Mm-hmm.
Changes based on what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an old saying, the master fattens the stock. And so it's not a static environment. All these things are going to vary.
Right.
All right. So same thing with protein. And we're going to talk about protein. I hate the word protein. We're going to get into that next.
Okay.
So, and this also goes for your vitamins and minerals. The more you're performing, the more you're sweating, the more of those electrolytes we have to replace.
Right.
So it's not a one-stop shop.
Okay.
Same thing is said for vitamins. These help facilitate biologic activity in the body. the more biologic activity you have, the higher your demand for vitamins. All right. So what you want to think about, I always remember Michael Phelps from the Olympics. I don't know if y'all remember him, the swimmer.
Yeah.
You know how many calories he had to consume in a day?
I don't even want to know.
It's like 9,000 calories, okay? Like
Not an average person.
No. and basically the guy's like, so you can eat whatever you want. He said, I can eat whatever I want. Like
So lucky.
9,000 calories, okay? But this man lived in a swimming pool.
Right, yeah.
These things off. Now, obviously, I eat 9,000 calories, and it's
a bad day.
It's going to go south. And this guy was like, still toting a six-pack.
Right.
So, but all these things play a role in this same formula. This formula doesn't change for the nutrients, except for the cold part. That's just involved in calories. All these other things, we're going to follow the same formula the entire time. Okay?
Right.
Make sense?
It does.
All right, so the next base I want to get into is let's talk about protein.
Okay.
All right. When you read a bag, all right, and it says protein, all right, that's crude protein.
Meaning
it is just straight up crude, all right, meaning that it's not an exact science.
Okay.
Literally the way crude protein is calculated, we take and we weigh out the sample. We put it into a little foil, I call it a Hershey Kiss. We set it in a machine and we just light it on fire.
Okay.
All right. Then we have a machine that measures the amount of nitrogen. So we set the stuff on fire. We take the amount of nitrogen, all right. So nitrogen that comes off of it multiplied by 6.25 equals crude protein.
Okay.
The reason is we say protein is roughly 16% nitrogen. All right. And so if we take the amount of nitrogen that comes off, multiply it by 6.25, that tells us what our crude protein
actually is. Okay.
That's how that's calculated. This is not accurate. Not at all. So what matters actually is not the crude protein in the diet. What actually matters to these guys right here, amino acids.
Okay.
All right. The body's made up of amino acids, or protein's made up of amino acids. You have to have the right supply of amino acids, or we're not going to build protein.
Okay. So like basically we could throw the word protein out and replace it with amino acids.
In every other species, we do not balance a diet based on crude protein.
Okay.
The horse is the last one.
Okay.
And guys, everybody listening to this podcast has horses. You know what you're spending on them. And we all think we spend a lot on horses, and we think we're a really big deal.
Right.
Okay. In the grand scheme of things, we're such a small share of the market. I was just in a conference last week, and they were looking at there's a company that reports back drug sales for the entire country, and they look at this is across all sectors. Okay, to give you an idea, drug sales to the cattle industry is about $1.5 billion. To the small animal market, we're dealing with about $4.4 billion. Anybody take a guess on what equine is?
5 billion?
Try 400 million.
Oh.
400 million. So we're 10% of the small animal market share, and we're a third of the cattle market share. And guess what? The same thing's going into the feed.
Yeah.
All right, so we think we're a really big deal, but
we're not.
In the grand scope of things, we're not there. Grand scope of things, we're not there. So every other species, because protein, that's the most expensive nutrient out there. This is, when I was doing nutrition work in cattle, this was a big deal because that's the most expensive nutrient. We don't want to waste this. Don't want to waste it.
Okay.
So we go through and we balance these diets for cattle, pigs, chickens, even dogs and cats. We're balancing on this amino acid supply.
Okay.
We know what the animal needs to maintain, perform, gain. We know all that data. The horse, we're still feeding crude protein too. All right. It's still crude.
It's like, okay.
In nutrition, when we're talking about protein, it's called a limiting amino acid. Okay. A limiting amino acid, basically what it says is whatever your lowest one is, that's all the protein, that's all the muscle structure and all the protein structures you can build.
Okay.
Is what you have in the least amount of supply. It's called a limiting amino acid. The way I like to think about this is a bucket. All right, I don't know if anybody remembers those old buckets. They got wood slats on the side. Or think about it like a barrel, like the old wooden whiskey barrels, things like that. So I'm gonna draw it like, basically, this is what it looks like. So these are the slats in our bucket, all right? So what we're looking at here, we're feeding this diet. We got lysine, methionine, threonine, and arginine. There's a whole bunch of different amino acids. I just threw these 4 up here. If these were slats in a bucket, all right, and we're trying to make protein, we're trying to make protein structures, these are the amino acids we have. If we were to fill this bucket full of water, that's as far as we can fill it. Make sense? Because I can't, if I try, I can't fill this bucket any higher with water than that one slat right there. It's going to leak out when it gets there.
Right, that makes sense.
So that's our limit. That's as far as we can go.
Okay.
Can't go any further. That's as far as we can go with our protein supply.
Okay.
So if we don't increase the amount of threonine in this diet, we can't go any further.
Right.
All right, so then we go in, we determine we think we're deficient there. We increase it. Then if we were to look at it, the next limiter we have is lysine or arginine.
Right.
All right. Now, this becomes important because when you're feeding crude protein, you may not know how much of this is in there. So I think it's important to look at bags, and we have a rough idea. Lysine, methionine, and threonine, those seem to be the 3 most limited amino acids in a horse's diet.
Okay.
Those seem to be the ones that we're lacking the most.
Where would they get it elsewhere?
It's going to come from grass.
The grass.
It's going to come from hay. It's going to come from the grain. And then we're going to talk a little bit too about balancers.
Okay.
We're going to talk about balancer rations as well. So this is important, all right, because we've got to make sure, because you can be dumping all the protein in the world to them. But if we're deficient in one of these, it does us no good.
And you're saying these amino acids are on the bag, or they're not?
Sometimes they're on the bag. Sometimes they're not. A lot of feed companies now are starting to list the lysine, methionine, and threonine content. A lot of them are starting to list that. If not, pick up the phone, call your rep, and they may be able to walk you through that.
Okay.
Most of these feed companies are great to work with. They've got local reps. They want to talk to you. They want to help. They've got nutritionists on staff as well.
Okay.
I'm not a nutritionist. I had done a lot in nutrition, but there are people a lot smarter than me out there too.
Okay.
All right. So the next nutrient I want to talk about is fat.
Okay.
I hear this all. What do you hear all the time?
I hear all the time to add oil to the diet because it'll make my horse fat.
Right. Who's heard of keto?
Right. It's keto diet.
Keto diet. You got the keto diet, Atkins diet. Is South? I can't remember what South Beach is. I don't keep up with these trends.
Yeah.
I don't know. Fat don't make you fat, right? That's what keto's taught us, right? And it's because biochemically we lack the enzyme to convert fat into fat.
Okay.
All right. Carbohydrates make us fat.
Right.
All right. So you're going to hear me very seldom talk about fat. I think fat's good. Certain fats can actually play an anti-inflammatory role in the body, can help out with arachidonic acid. Certain fats can actually be pro-inflammatory and cause more inflammation.
Right.
My big thing when I'm looking at that is I want to make sure we got a good supply of omega-3s in this diet. And omega-3s are important for skin and coat health.
Right.
They can also be anti-inflammatory and be used for other processes in the body. But this is pretty low.
Okay.
And if you think about it from a common sense perspective, horses don't have a gallbladder. They don't have a gallbladder. Yeah. Okay? That's because they're grazers. As we talked about in the ulcer scenario, they're grazers.
Right.
And there's not a lot of fat in grass.
Right.
Kind of like lettuce. Nobody's like, I need to get some fat. Let me go get some lettuce. All right. Herbivores are not big fat consumers.
Right.
All right. The only fat they really get is from the lipids in the cell wall. And so I always say, like, try to think about how an animal's designed. All right. Because the good Lord, like, he got a plan here. And he made them go eat grass. And he's like, you know what? You're going to do so well with fat, you don't even get a gallbladder.
Okay.
And so let's don't even worry about this one.
Right.
Throw some omega-3s in there.
Yeah. Call it a day.
Call it a day.
Okay.
All right. Vitamin and mineral demand. This is important.
Okay.
we got to make sure we get the right supply here. But these are what I call micronutrients. I want to focus on macro today. All right. So this all makes sense, right?
It does. Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's talk about how do we produce that balanced diet? Like, what are some things we can do to produce that balanced diet? And I think that's really what we're trying to get at, right?
Yeah.
So really what you were getting at, what do I feed my horse?
Correct.
All right. And that's what most people want to know, because when you get into some of the nerd, like I'll over nerd on this all day long. You call it nutrition stuff, especially the feed companies. These people live for this. They can sit down and they're going to nerd.
Yeah.
But again, we want to keep this as basic and simple as possible.
Right.
All right. So let's go through a few rules and how you can start thinking through your diet and how you can start thinking through this, because that's important. You don't want to just say like, hey, let me go grab feed and throw it out.
Yeah. I want to know why.
Know why you're doing what you're doing. One of the things, I actually carry one in my truck, I think a digital scale. Every barn needs a scale, in my opinion, because like the worst thing in the world, I always ask like, how much you feed? And I keep one in the truck when I'm talking.
Yeah.
What do you measure by?
By my scooper, and I don't know how much that is in pounds.
Yeah, and like I have noticed, like scoops come in all shapes and sizes.
True.
I mean, I've seen scoops and I've seen scoops.
Like the cow shovel ones, or
it's kind of like, you go get a drink at the gas station, like you go get a cup.
Yeah, you don't know.
You got a cup, and you got like a cup, and then you got like an actual cup.
Right.
So cups and scoops, like it always changes. My wife, she's a small animal vet, and that's one of the things people come in. She's like, "How much you feed?" And like, well, I feed them a cup.
Everyone's cup is different.
Yeah, and you find out this cup came from the QT, and it's like this big cup.
The big Q.
Yeah, and she's probably thinking like, why is this dog fat? Because like a cup is like, she's thinking a measuring cup, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's like a cup.
Yeah.
So a scale is critical. So why is a scale critical? Let's talk about what a horse can eat. I'm gonna give you a few basic rules. All right. All right, a horse can eat 2.5% of body weight. That's what they can consume in a day. That's roughly 25 pounds.
Okay.
All right, that's a 1,000-pound horse, roughly 25 pounds a day. That's hay, grain, and everything.
Okay.
And as y'all heard in our ulcer episode, we don't like to exceed 1% of body weight as a concentrate, as grain. All right, so no more than 10 pounds a day. My goal, like that's the cutoff. That's your max.
Right.
I don't like to bump up against that. I want to keep it down, all right? So if you think about it, that means 1.5% is going to be forage. And I cannot preach this enough.
Right.
Forage is your number one feed source.
Right.
Okay, that's the bulk of your horse's diet. Make sure this is the best forage money can buy. All right. If you had to ask me where to put your money in feed or in hay or in grass, I'm going to tell you put it in your forage. All right. We want the highest quality hay we can find.
Which is like, what kind do you like us to feed?
Okay, so there's not just a matter of what kind. Like I love alfalfa.
Right.
I love orchard. I love Timothy, but the way we cut Timothy is a seed head. Like if you didn't have a seed head, a lot of people don't want to use a Timothy. Just remember, when things go to seed, our nutrient quality is dropping.
Down.
The younger the forage, the more nutrient dense it is.
Right.
So,
which means like when it is about to seed is when it's probably prettiest. Is that correct?
When it's about to seed, that's when it's the least digestible. But for whatever reason, if you don't have a seed head on Timothy, nobody will buy it.
Well, because everyone looks at Timothy and they're like, it either looks good or it doesn't. And if it looks good, like my horses don't want Timothy anymore.
Right.
And I'll even get like the green Timothy and they're like, no. But so that's what I was curious about.
Yeah, I like all kinds of hay, but this is the one thing, and it becomes difficult because if you can buy in large quantities, like when I consult for these bigger farms, we're buying tonnage, right?
Right.
We're going in and we're buying, like I've got one farm, we're going to buy 300 tons a year. All right, so when we buy hay, we're buying 300 tons. We're going to buy on a hay test. All right, we're not getting into forage testing today. That's too much for this episode.
Right.
We can do another one. If y'all want, let me know in the comments. We'll be happy to dive into what a forage analysis looks like, and we can break that down.
Right.
But you want to buy the highest quality hay you can find, all right? The best way to do that is get it tested. You can look at hay all day long. I've looked at beautiful hay over the years. I'm like, man, that stuff looks amazing. We get the hay test back, and we got relative feed values of like less than 80. And my goal is I'm not going to balance your diet off the relative feed value. That's a number that allows us to look not just at nutrient content, but digestibility. I want like 120 plus.
Yeah,
all right, that's
I've
what I'm
heard you say
looking
that.
for. So hay test. So number one nutrient you want, high quality hay. Cannot, and this is, when I say hay, this is forage. If you've got grass, like we're lucky, we're down here in Georgia. In this part of Georgia, between the Bermuda and the fescue, we can keep grass just about year round, depending on stocking densities. When you're buying hay, you want the highest quality hay you can buy, though.
Okay.
All right, that's where we want to start. The whole point of the next two things we're going to talk about is the supplement what we're not getting from forage. That makes sense? It's the bulk of our diet. We want to feed the highest quality. I've had many barns I've gone into. We changed the hays we were buying. We started focusing on hay quality. We started testing. We pushed our quality of our hay up. Our grain demands went way down. We can get that concentrate down. Guess what?
Right.
We can reduce our risk of stomach ulcers. We got this horse eating more what he's intended to eat. Okay?
Okay.
Make sense?
It does.
So this is where I'm going to differ from a lot of people. All right. I'm going to balance this diet not on grain first, but I'm going to use a balancer.
Okay.
All right. So for those of you not familiar, the balancer rations, they're extremely high protein rations. They're most of them are going to be in the 30 to 35% protein range. They're going to spec out that lysine, methionine, and threonine. That's going to be on the back.
Okay.
All right. These are originally designed for horses that are easy keepers. All right. So the horses that don't really need carbohydrate in their life, they just need to get a few amino acids they don't have. But then also we figured out that these horses that were really cutting back on the amount of grain they're getting, they're also lacking in that vitamin and mineral category. All right. So we can go in, we'll start first with the balancer. And a lot of people get worried. Like, what's your first concern? You hear it's 33% protein. What's your first concern? The horse is going to get hot. That's a lot of protein, right?
Well, I hear that with alfalfa a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alfalfa.
Yep. So a lot of times people hear like 33% protein, that's a lot. We're going to be feeding 1 to 2 pounds that a day. All right. So you do the math. That means for every pound of balancer you're feeding, you're getting a third of a pound of protein. That's roughly what 6 ounces. Yeah. I mean, it's a little less than that, like 5.23 ounces of protein. So if you feed 2 pounds a day, we're up to 10 ounces.
Like, don't we eat like more than that? Like, come on.
That's like
a steak dinner.
Yeah, that's a steak, guys. That's a steak. That's a large hamburger.
Right.
Like, it's not, and we're way smaller than a horse.
Yeah.
So people see that and like, man, that's high. And you're like, well, yeah, but let's break this down. You're feeding a pound. Well, you're gonna be getting like 5 ounces of protein out of that, and you feed 2 pounds, you're gonna get 10 ounces of protein. I don't know about you, but I love a 12-ounce ribeye. I love a 16-ounce ribeye. Okay, it's just not that much in the grand scheme of things. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna do, whatever my hay's lacking, and I'm gonna look at my horse. If I don't have a hay analysis, do I have a decreased muscle tone, or do I have a decreased body condition score? Body condition score is how fat you are. If my muscle's not developing, then it tells me I've got an amino acid problem.
Okay.
All right, so I'm gonna add a balancer in. All right. So when I add this balancer ration, every company's got one. I'm gonna do a couple things. One, I'm gonna try to balance out for my amino acids. All right. I'm also gonna go ahead and balance out for my vitamins and minerals.
Okay.
Okay. So that one feed right here, and most horses, depending on where they're at in work, it's going to be 1 to 2 pounds a day of that. All right, 1 to 2 pounds. All right, so let's look through. I know my max is going to be 10 pounds. I want to build a margin of safety in here. I've bought really great hay, so I'm going to try to hold my grain feeding to about 8 pounds a day. All right, that gives me a buffer to stay out of that. This is for a 1,000-pound horse. All our math is going to be on a 1,000-pound horse.
Right.
If I start 1% of body weight, that's the max I want to be. That's 10 pounds a day. Again, I want to maintain, we're not getting stomach ulcers. I want to build me a margin of safety in there.
Correct. Right.
I'm going to go to 8 pounds.
Right.
All right, 8 pounds. So if I feed, let's say I need to increase my muscle tone, we go back, I need to maintain what I've got. I need to perform, but also need to put on some muscle. I'm going to grab 2 pounds of balancer. All right?
Okay.
So I grab 2 pounds of balancer. All right, I still got 6 pounds left that I get to do something with.
The 8 pound is the hay?
No,
What
8
did you
pounds
say
is the
that-
grain.
Okay.
This is my grain. I'm going to feed 8 pounds of grain because, again, 10 pounds a day is the max of my concentrate. Build me a margin of safety in there. I'm going to say we're going to try to balance this diet for a 1,000-pound horse on 8 pounds of feed a day.
Okay.
And the lower I can get this number, the better.
It's better, right.
I get a real high quality hay, great amino acid profile. That's where the alfalfa kicks in. Great non-structural carbohydrate profile. I love some pectins, more complex. Not all the way to fiber, but not real simple sugars. And that's where alfalfa fits. Okay. Alfalfa's got more of these pectins. A little, a little more complex carbohydrate than a true, like a little more complex than like a grain. Grain's gonna be high in starch, really simple sugars. We'll do another episode. We're gonna do a deep dive into hay analysis. We're gonna get into that and really do a deep dive into individual nutrients.
Okay.
But just know alfalfa hays, some orchard hays. One of my favorites is actually rye, well-cut rye hay. That's the hay that we grow here. Is one of my favorite hays when you start talking about carbohydrate profiles.
Okay.
So we're going to have that on board. And again, we're going to try to stay under that 8 pounds.
Okay.
Let's try to stay under that 8 pounds. So I'm going to feed 2 pounds of balancer today. All right, the way that balancer's set up, if I'm feeding 2 pounds a day, we go back to our list. I can check off my vitamins. I can check off my minerals. That's done. That's also going to get, with a good quality hay, that's going to also get the bulk of my amino acids checked off.
Okay.
All right, so we've got that.
Yeah.
So then it comes down to what other nutrient are we lacking?
Right.
Carbs. Okay, carbohydrates. This is where your feeds come in. Okay, so 3. So we start looking at feed. All right, there's a lot of different ranges. My goal, I want to feed as little as possible.
Right.
So that also means I want one of the more concentrated type feeds.
Okay.
I love something that's high in carbohydrates. The big push right now is low carb feeds. And again, you've got to pay attention to your horse. I balance the bulk of his nutrients right here with a balancer.
Right.
Bulk of them are balanced right there. My feed comes in, I'm just looking for these carbohydrates. And again, my whole goal is to feed as little of this as I can, little as feed as possible. Because I only got 6 pounds to work with. All right. So what do you choose? The big push is senior feeds right now. A lot of people love a senior.
Right.
Senior feeds are not set up senior feeds are set up to be fed as a complete feed. They're complete feeds. Made to be fed at a high rate. When you read the bags, these things can vary from 12 to 16 pounds.
Right.
Hence why we've got to add that balancer in, because in order to balance out the supply of those vitamins and minerals and the amino acids, you got to feed it that label direction on the bag. We don't want to do that. All right, they're set up for senior horses that need to eat more. We're trying to stick in that range there. So what I tell you is read the bags. Every bag's got a guaranteed analysis on it. That's what's on the back of the bag. It's got the feed tag. By law, they got to have one.
Okay.
The number you're looking for to balance out for this carbohydrate is, there's a lot of different terms out there. You're going to hear NSCs. So you're talking NSC, that's non-structural carbohydrate. You're going to hear about WSCs, that's water-soluble carbohydrates. And you're going to hear about ESCs, that is ethanol-soluble carbohydrates. So these two add up to this one.
Okay.
So I say, hey, let's focus on this.
Okay.
There are some subtle differences in these, and this is based on how complex they are. By complexity, how many carbons do we hook together? How many glucose molecules do we hook together?
Okay.
Whether we're talking fiber or we're talking about starch, it all goes back to how many glucose molecules are attached together. All right.
Okay.
So the more glucose molecules are attached together, the more branches we have off of it, the more complex it is.
Right.
All right. More complex, the more it takes to break down. The easiest way to think about that, you've eaten oatmeal, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. What happens with oatmeal?
How it like swells.
How it kind of swells and gets kind of gooey and sticky,
Right.
right? That's pectin. Pectins. All right. Pectins are more complex. So if you think about it, if you eat a bowl of like really sweet sugary cereal, you get that big, huge sugar rush, right? You don't get that with oatmeal.
Right.
The reason being is that real simple sugars break down fast, spike the blood sugar. Those pectins take longer to break down, and so it's a slower release of that carbohydrate. That slower release of the carbohydrate, that's what allows us to not get those huge spikes in glucose and those huge insulin spikes.
Right.
All right. So that's why we talk about, like, you're going to go get some oatmeal and you don't get that, it kind of sticks with you. You don't get that sugar rush, right? It's not like eating some corn. Makes sense?
Yeah.
So that's really what we're looking for.
Okay.
All right. And then we're going to feed this at a rate to get our horse to gain. This is where we're looking to gain in body condition. We're looking to gain weight.
Okay.
All right. So we may start off, if we just got to maintain, there's going to be very little of this in our diet. All right. Very little.
Yeah.
We start performing, our demand for these carbohydrates goes
Increase.
up. So guess what? This number gets bigger. We may be only feeding this horse 2 pounds a day of feed. He may be on 2 pounds of balancer, and Bacardi's just standing there around hanging out. She may only be eating 2 pounds a day because that's all this carbohydrate she needs. We just got to maintain.
Yeah.
You go back to showing again. Exercise demands go up. We got the Michael Phelps situation. We get to go eat 9,000 calories a day.
Right.
So the more exercise she's in, the more of this we're going to need.
Okay.
Same thing. She may be maintaining on 1 pound of balancer here,
Okay.
but you start exercising, you may need to go to 2 pounds of balancer, and then she's been eating 2 pounds of feed, she may have to go to 4 pounds of feed to make up that difference.
Right. Okay.
Again, if we want to gain weight, a horse, let's say, is a body condition score of 4, we're trying to get them to a 5. About roughly, that's about 75 pounds of gain for each body condition score. So we're going to have to increase the amount of this to get us to gain weight.
Right.
We're also going to have to increase the amount of nutrients here to put on
Right.
the muscle that we need.
That's what I was going to ask. Okay. And so, like, where does beet pulp fall into place? Because I hear people use their beet pulp. They have their soaked feeds, their beet pulp, and their alfalfa pellets. Like, where does that fall into place here?
All right, so beet pulp gets to be called a concentrate. The definition of a concentrate is a protein greater than 9%.
Okay.
Beet pulp has that. Where beet pulp is actually made is they out west you harvest sugar beets. We extract the sugar from sugar beets. You used to use sugar cane purely from sugar cane. You go take some sugar cane, squeeze the juice out, you make sugar out of it.
Okay.
A more economical way to produce this, because sugar cane's got very strict growing conditions, it's got to be wet, it's got to be hot, it's more challenging to grow. We then learn how to make sugar from sugar beets. These things can grow in arid climates. When I lived in Wyoming, sugar beets are everywhere. I mean, I'm talking about these things were piled up in stacks bigger than this hospital.
Yeah.
Going on for miles, it seemed
Crazy.
like. So once they extract all the sugar out of it, what you're left with is the pulp. That pulp's going to be high in fiber, and it's going to have that 9% protein. Very, very little of this. Very little of this.
Okay.
It's still not a bad feed source. But if you're trying to get a horse to gain weight,
Right.
that's not what we're looking.
I gotcha. Okay.
We don't have as much. We don't have enough of this. This is the best way to get a horse to gain weight. These non-structural carbohydrates. It doesn't have as much of that. All right. So this is where we got to look for structure. We got to look for feed products that are higher in this. Oats is one of my favorite ones. Again, corn also very high in non-structural carbohydrates, but that's got corn starch,
Right.
which is rapidly broken down, rapidly absorbed.
Right.
You're going to have more of that. You're going to have a higher rise in that blood sugar concentration. The
Okay.
horse pushing insulin up, and
Yeah.
it's going to go up and it's going to crash back down. The pectins inside of oats are going to allow for that more slower release of those structures.
Okay.
Make sense? So those are the things we want to balance.
Okay.
Beet pulp, great in certain situations. If I'm really trying to get weight on a horse, it's not going to be my go-to.
But for maintaining weight,
Maintaining, absolutely.
yeah. Okay.
Again, definition of concentrate greater than 9% protein.
Okay.
That's where the beet pulp's going to fall
Right.
in, but not going to be high in this. It does have a decent amino acid profile as well. So that's what we're going to focus on, is something. I'm looking for oats in here, something with a little more oat to it.
Okay.
And if you think about it, when you look at feeds, right, if you're looking for, like, some of the highest nutrient demands are when you've got mares that are about to foal and mares that are lactating. That's one of the highest nutrient demands. In fact, in most cases, if you have a mare that's lactating, you physically cannot feed them enough to keep them from losing weight, which is why we put good condition on those mares.
Right.
They're going to drop weight when they're lactating, all right? And so mare and foal feeds are very, very high in that non-structural carbohydrate because we're trying to get the weight on.
Right.
And a lot of those, when you look at these really high non-structural carbohydrate feeds, you're going to see a lot of oats in there.
Right.
A lot more oats. You're going to see a little corn, things like that.
So if like we have a horse that's underweight, you're fine with them putting their horse on the mare and foal feed?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Use it all the
to
time.
gain weight.
Use it all the time. And again, we're trying to gain weight. And I think the most important thing to remember is nutrition's never a set it and forget it.
Yeah.
Never set it and forget it. As they gain weight, we may end up back on, like, when we get to where we need to be, a senior feed may help maintain them just fine.
Right.
As long as we've got this balancer. Because we're not feeding that feed at the label directions. If you're not feeding the label directions, you're going to be short in these nutrients. Okay, you're going to be
Right.
short here. So we've got to make that up. So that's where we grab the balancer.
Right. Okay.
And again, that's why this is where I start. All right, best quality hay I can find. Gonna add the balancer in. I'm gonna clean these up. I'm trying to get stuff checked off. So when I get down to the feed, I'm just looking carbohydrates.
Okay.
Just looking for carbohydrates. And again, the whole goal is keep it low, less than that 8.
Yeah.
So absolutely use mare and foal feeds all the time
Okay.
to get these horses to gain weight. I'll also look at some of the high performance feeds. Again, I don't care about fat. The number I'm looking for is this one right here. When we're buying feed, that's what we're actually buying. Again, and this is for normal situations. You start to get into metabolic disease, I call those specialty
Yeah.
diets.
Right.
We start adding in metabolic disease, especially horses with equine metabolic syndrome, and we start talking about insulin resistance, a whole different ball game, not what we're talking
Right.
about today.
Right.
This is normal horses, okay?
Okay. And do you like them to have mineral blocks, salt blocks, accessible?
Yes, so my preferred is a loose mineral salt.
Okay.
So when you start looking at a block, mineral blocks were designed for cows, ruminants, cows, sheep, goats. If you ever been licked by a cow?
Their tongue is so coarse.
It's like sandpaper,
Oh my
right?
goodness, yeah.
It's like sandpaper. You've been licked by a horse?
Not the
like
same.
sandpaper, okay? So those blocks were built because, I mean, when that sandpaper, that tongue, I mean, they can lick boards and they
Yeah.
can sand a board,
Yeah.
right? So loose mineral salts are actually my favorite.
Okay.
All right, loose mineral salts. In a perfect world, that's what we're going to have access to, and then we're also going to balance those based on what our diet is. There's a company, Progressive Nutrition, that used to make a mineral, and they had 2 different ones. You had to pick, like, are you on a grass-based diet or are you on an alfalfa-based diet? The big difference there is calcium and phosphorus.
Oh.
Calcium is much, much higher in alfalfa, much lower in grass. So again, if you're on mostly alfalfa-based diet, your calcium demands are probably met. So we actually, a lot of times, we want that 2-to-1 calcium-phosphorus ratio. If we're on a high alfalfa diet, we may actually want a mineral that's lower in calcium but higher in phosphorus, so we maintain that balance. Again, if we're on a grass-based diet, we may be deficient in calcium, so we need a mineral that's got a higher
Right.
amount of calcium.
Okay.
So loose mineral salts, and then also looking at those calcium phosphorus ratios, some of those other micronutrients, are we balancing those out based on what the bulk of our diet is?
Okay.
Straight salt, I talk about the time I see just straight salt everywhere. Straight salt's great. I prefer a mineral mix, is what I really prefer.
Okay.
But now, and the hard part is finding those loose minerals. I think Redmond may still make one. There's a couple companies still making that loose mineral, and that's really what I prefer over a block.
Okay.
So, what other questions do you have?
Well, I hear supplements all the time.
Supplements.
if there's anything that you think is important to add. Like I know a lot of people like to have their horse on vitamin E or electrolytes, if you like to incorporate that.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that vitamin E. Vitamin E, I cannot, like that is critical for a lot of cell function. Vitamin E is very, very important in the diet from an antioxidant. So, all right, I'm nerding for a minute. We got a cell wall. Inside the cell wall, all right, we got these blocks of vitamin E. We got these little structures here. That's what a cell wall looks like. There's our vitamin E. What happens when we produce a free radical? So a free radical is what we call a reactive oxygen species. It's an oxygen with a negative charge, or it's a lone electron floating out here somewhere. It's probably not what anybody wanted to hear about was chemistry today. These are reactive oxygen species. This is a normal product of metabolism. And the more inflammation you have, the more of these you're going to make. This little guy right here, this reactive oxygen species, he comes tearing through the cell wall, tearing everything up, and then vitamin E catches him. Boom! I got him. All right? So he catches that guy and stops him from tearing the world up. All right? Vitamin E is critical for this, especially for muscle development, because, and especially the more your horse is exercising, your vitamin E demand goes up.
Right.
The only source of vitamin E in your horse's diet is fresh green grass.
Right.
Most of our management situations these days, we don't have enough vitamin E. We can go into vitamin E at a later date. I'm just going to tell you, there's only two products that are worth using: Nano E and Elevate E. So Nano E and Elevate E, the only two products I recommend. Normal horse not performing is going to need about 2,000 IUs of Nano E, or of vitamin E a day. So we want to make sure that's being provided. So if as exercise demands go up, we're going to be producing more of these reactive oxygen species, more of these free radicals. Vitamin E consumption needs to go up as well.
Okay.
All right. So supplementing that, most horses, like I said, 2,000 IUs is a normal rate. My athletes, I've got most of them on somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000, 3,000 to 5,000 IUs a day. All right. Again, I use Elevate E, I use Nano E. Those are my two.
Well, there are a lot of products that claim they're vitamin E, and can you explain why?
Okay. So a couple things. All right, this is why we had to take organic chemistry. Vitamin E has to be a natural source. The nerd name for vitamin E is alpha tocopherol. All right. If you see D and L, all right, so you'll see DL alpha tocopherol. When you see that, you know it's a synthetic molecule.
Okay.
It's not natural source. You want D alpha tocopherol is what you want.
Okay.
You want to see the D there. That means it's more than likely natural sourced. The other thing about it is you have to protect it. Vitamin E is very rapidly oxidized and destroyed. When we cut hay, the first nutrient to leave hay is vitamin E. First one to leave. First one to oxidize and become non-existent.
Gotcha.
So it's critical, and I think that's almost an episode unto itself, jumping into vitamin E. We'll get into that in more detail. Basics of it are, it has to be natural sourced. It has to be protected. Micellized is the best way. That's what Nano E does, is it's a micellized vitamin E. So again, without going too far, we want to stick Nano E, Elevate E. Those are the two we want to supplement in. So. All right, so this is the basics of nutrition. Again, this is a really high-level overview. We're not going into the weeds. I mean, like I said, I can spend a whole episode talking about vitamin E. I can dive off into amino acids and what they do, but this is a simple way to think about it. All right, this is a very simplified version, but it gives you a way to start thinking about your diet, knowing what these nutrients are doing when you're feeding them to your horse, when you're adding them to the diet, what you're doing and what your goals are. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Riley, thanks for being here today. I look forward to seeing y'all next time. Again, if y'all got questions, comments, want something covered, put it down in the comments section, DM us, send us an email, shoot us a call, whatever you want to do. Get in touch. Be happy to do that. So again, thanks for tuning in.